starting with the model year 2027, every new car sold in America must come with technology that monitors you while driving and can disable your vehicle if an algorithm decides you're impaired. So hopefully you don't have to dodge a deer on the road or a bunny or a squirrel, hopefully, or a kid, they ended up bundling this in the 2021 Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, which is Section 24220, and they tried to market it as the Halt Drunk Driving Act. And if you still think that there's a meaningful difference between these two parties, by that I mean Democrats and Republicans, I really don't know what to tell you, because they voted together to expand the entire surveillance infrastructure. None of these people are against each other. They're just against you, and it's a fake fight that exists. Now, the law, if we look at it, spells out exactly what the requirements of this system are. It requires technology that can passively monitor the performance of a driver and prevent or limit motor vehicle operation if impairment is detected. So, former Congressman Bob Barr, who served in the CIA during the 1970s and as a U.S. attorney in the 1980s, flagged this when the bill first passed back in 2021. And the word passively means the system is always on. It's a nice dress-up word, is basically what it is, but it's always on. It's constantly monitoring you. It connects to the vehicle, and it has the ability to disable it, meaning it's wired into your engine management. And that means that it has a backdoor for authorized third parties to access the data remotely. Totally won't be an issue. There's no such thing as data breaches. There's no such thing as access for sale. You totally don't have to worry about that. But Barr called it a privacy disaster in the making. And obviously, that's a massive understatement. People throw around the 1984 kind of comparison a lot, especially as of late. I'm guilty of it too. And usually I'd argue it's hyperbole. But in this case, I genuinely think that, it's not. We've gone past what Orwell wrote in 1984 by vast distances. In 1984, the telescreens watched you in your home and listened to your conversations. And that was terrifying enough on its own, back then. But Winston Smith could still walk down the street. He could physically move through the world without a machine scanning his blood chemistry and deciding whether he was allowed to go somewhere. The party controlled information and rewrote history. Again, that's not good, but they didn't have sensors embedded into the steering wheel reading your capillary blood alcohol level every time you touched it. They didn't have infrared cameras tracking your eyeball movements and head position to judge whether you seemed impaired according to some algorithm. Now, Orwell's dystopia was built on surveillance, but what we're building goes way beyond that, because it's surveillance combined with this automated physical control over your actual movement, your right to travel being impeded. And Congress funded it, and bipartisan, enthusiasm existed, while they always label it as safety. It's the default that they always go back to. The technology behind all of this comes from DADSS program, which is a driver alcohol detection system for safety. And they've been working on this since 2008. One approach uses infrared sensors to analyze your exhaled air without you blowing into anything, supposedly distinguishing your breath from passengers. And another approach, which I think is worse, and it involves spectroscopy to measure blood alcohol through your skin when you touch the start button or the steering wheel. They shine infrared lights into your capillaries and measure what comes back. And both systems are engineered to detect 0.08 BAC, or blood alcohol content, or above, to prevent a car from actually starting. And after 18 years of development, this technology still fails to meet the standard for basic consumer vehicles. In 2023, round of testing showed 85% overall accuracy, and IIHS found a 10% false positive rate for eye tracking systems in dim light. Now, NHTSA told the Associated Press this month that they're still, quote, assessing development technologies for potential development. Meanwhile, the president of the Automotive Coalition for Traffic Safety went on record saying that the tech is, quote, ready to go to auto manufacturers. Yes, with an 85% error rate. That sounds great. Let's everyone stick that in your car. There'll be absolutely no issues. Can you imagine how well that goes? You're running late to work. You run out to the car. You have all your crap with you. You hop in. You're going to start the car. It doesn't start. It tells you you're drunk. Like, totally not infuriating. That will make everything go so much better in this economy that's already upside down and totally screwed up. So essentially, these two statements, they can't both be true. And Congress clearly has its own doubts, but they don't care. They have drivers. They're not slave level people like everyone else. So considering there's this bipartisan bill advancing right now, the Drunk Driving Preventative and Enforcement Act, offering a $45 million prize to whoever can produce the first consumer-ready system, they basically mandated technology and then turned around and offered a bounty to invent it. The bounty, by the way, comes from your tax dollars. So that's awesome. We're going to restrict your ability to use your car, and you're going to pay for it. Totally makes sense. And the false positive problem really is something that nobody in Congress seems to care about. Again, why would they? People with things like diabetes produce ketones when their body sugar's high, and breathalyzers can't distinguish acetone from ethanol alcohol. And keto diets, basically have been used as a defense in DUI court cases because the devices can't tell the difference between ketosis and intoxication. Pro tip, right? For the tyranny, when they try to fine you if you drive 5 miles an hour over the limit, or they say you're driving erratically, it's a defense that works. Anyways, mouthwash with up to 27% alcohol triggers them also. Ignition interlocks on DUI offenders' cars have already had this very problem, and they can't differentiate between Listerine and beer. The Alliance for Automotive Innovation, which represents the actual manufacturers who have actually got to build this stuff, told regulators that even a false positive rate of 1 in 10,000 trips would strand tens of thousands of unimpaired people every single day. And now this tech goes in every new car, deciding whether you're allowed to drive yourself to the hospital during an emergency. Pretty great, right? But I mean, Orwell, you see the trucks? You ever see the trucks in 1984? There's no, that crap doesn't exist. They probably don't have seatbelts. So, never mind seatbelt laws and fines if you don't wear them. So, anyways, I shouldn't even have to explain the constitutional problems with this, but really, here we are. So, Barr raised Fifth Amendment concerns because the system forces self-incrimination and Sixth Amendment issues because you've got no way to actually cross-examine the algorithm, right? So it's one side of the story being presented and a AI or algorithm being the judge, jury, and executioner. There's supposed to be two sides to be able to present an alternative argument, right? So The Fourth Amendment angle is just as bad in retrospect. Like in United States versus Jones back in 2012, the Supreme Court ruled that tracking vehicle movements required a warrant, period, right? But the loophole that they're exploiting is that the ruling applies to government surveillance, and once your car beams data to a manufacturer, police just basically ask the company for it instead of having to go get that warrant. So you lose whatever privacy protection that you thought you had. And if you want to see where all this data ends up, you really don't have to guess, because the lawsuits are already kind of piling up. GM's OnStar Smart Driver program was caught sharing detailed driving data with LexisNexis in Verisk, and we talked about that in the last video, but data brokers that sell it to insurance companies. A 65-year-old driver in Seattle with no accident history saw his insurance spike 21% because GM reported his driving habits without actually telling him. And the FTC finalized the settlement with GM back in January of last year, banning them from sharing geolocation driving data with consumer reporting agencies for 5 years. And Toyota got hit with a class action lawsuit in Texas for allegedly sharing telematics data with Progressive through a third-party analytics company, violating federal wiretap act. And it gets worse. You have Allstate's subsidiary already paid developers millions to embed tracking software in unrelated third-party apps, including SiriusXM, collecting driver data from 40 million active mobile connections every 15 seconds. The Texas Attorney General sued them for it, and the Mozilla Foundation tested 25 major car brands back in 2023, and all 25 failed basic privacy tests, with 92% giving drivers almost no control over their own data. So your car already generates about 25 gigs of data per hour and up to 4,000 gigabytes per day. And getting this data is embarrassingly easy for law enforcement, whether through court orders, to car makers, to data brokers, or, whatever, just like the device that's actually in the car that extracts, telematics when plugged into any vehicle. But really the easiest method is just asking, and companies freely admit to handing it over. So MAD has been lobbying for this since DADSS program actually began, and they're calling it the most important piece of legislation in their 45-year history. They claim it'll save 10,000 lives annually, even though they can't really prove that, using the 12,429 alcohol-impaired driving deaths from 2023 to justify mandatory surveillance in every new vehicle. And I don't minimize these deaths, but, the situation they're pushing creates infrastructure that'll be used for far more than catching drunk drivers. And it's really sad that people die from drunk drivers, but at the end of the day, it's also sad that people die from fast food. But we're not setting up surveillance grids for that. And that kills arguably a lot more people than drunk drivers. And, if you're thinking that the kill switch stays limited to things like, drunk driving, stuff like that, GM already remotely disables vehicles through OnStar's stolen vehicle shutdown, which reduces engine power and slows the car to idle speeds with police requests. Now, back in May of last year, GM launched Drive Block for a fleet of vehicles from their management platform. And now the Insurance Institute for Highway Safety has announced that they'll soon factor impairment detection into their top safety awards, which will normalize it. So even if the federal rule gets delayed for years, the insurance industry is building its own pressure to make the standard equipment, which means, the market forces will push this forward, whether the government mandate is ready or it's not. And once kill switch infrastructure exists in vehicles, nothing stops its expansion to speed limit enforcement or geofencing in no-drive zones. Netanyahu's coming to visit in this town, so, we want to keep the roads clear. They hit the button. Your car doesn't start. You're not going anywhere. They don't have to close off the roads. They just disable your vehicle from even being able to go on those roads. So an algorithm that you have no control of, you can't challenge, gets to decide whether your car gets to operate. Don't worry, you still get to make all the payments on it and do the nonsensical registration to the government. Absolute insanity. And the whole trajectory really keeps getting worse and worse with every vote. So basically you had people like Scott Perry who tried to introduce the No Kill Switches in Cars Act to repeal Section 24220 outright, and GovTrack gives that bill a 2% chance of getting past committee. I wonder why. Could it be because all these congressmen and congresswomen own stock and they know which ones to buy and which ones to dump? Could it be that the startup companies will be passed around Congress so that they can make more and more millions? Meanwhile, you can't get to work. NHTSA, which is the agency that's supposed to write the actual implementation rules, has lost about 25% of its people, dropping it to around 780 employees, down to roughly 575. And that was because of stuff like Doge. And even supporters now predict that rulemaking won't actually happen till at least 2027. And the manufacturers needing another 2 or 3 years after that, putting the realistic timeline for this tech reaching consumer vehicles at 2029 or 2030 at the earliest. So the mandate is law, right? And the funding survived. The repeal effort is dead on arrival. And the only thing really keeping this out of your car right now is that, the agency responsible for implementing it has been gutted by budget cuts, and the technology that they mandated remains unfinished. So the solution hasn't really changed because the bill got signed. Like, the solution is buy used vehicles from before the, telemantics era. And I'm talking about, pre-2015 or earlier if you want to be serious about it, right? Like, disable OnStar and similar systems where it's possible. Support legislators like Massie who actually fight these mandates instead of voting for them while tweeting about freedom, which is what the majority of Congress does. So look into what data your car currently collects and whether you could actually opt out of it. And for those with the technical ability, there are ways to disable or isolate telemantics modules that exist already. And, that's a topic for another video, another time. But you don't need their permission to protect your privacy if you're willing to take that action. And the window to act on this gets smaller every year. And make no mistake about it, auto manufacturers absolutely try to battle this. They try to make it very difficult, in some cases, for people to do that and have privacy, which begs the question, why? So it's basically a nightmare, and they're like, it's not enough that they're coming after everything, like now they're coming after the vehicles and putting kill switches in them too. But it's really wild to see this progress, this technocracy. But stay safe, stay aware. There are adversaries out there. Thanks for watching to the end. I'll see you in the next video.